have enough time for Q&A at the end. My name is Alexa Uda. I'm a reporter with the Texas Tribune. I cover demographics and politics, and I'm very happy to welcome you today. Just a quick reminder, there is lunch after this if you'd like to stick around, and then there's a documentary screening and a Q&A later. Our colleague asked me to make sure I mentioned that, so please stick around for that as well. We are here to talk about, for just about 45 minutes with Q&A at the end, about the human cost of immigration. We've got a great panel lined up. Next to me is J. Allen Carnes. He's the president of Winter Garden Produce and the former mayor of Uvalde, Texas. Next to him is Andrea Ramos Fernandez. She's a UTSA student and a Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals recipient. She's a junior studying public policy. Next to her, we have Dr. Joe May. He is the chancellor of the Dallas County Community College District, which is attended by several undocumented students. And next to him, we have Elizabeth Mejia. She is a San Antonio resident who spent some time in the detention facility in Carson City, Texas, with her children. She's originally from Honduras. Next to her, we have Ana Ortiz, who will be interpreting for Elizabeth. You might see me switch into Spanish when I ask Elizabeth a question. Ana will be interpreting back into English for us. She is with the Refugee and Immigrant Center for Education and Legal Services here in San Antonio. Let's give them a round of applause. Thank you for being here. I think we can all agree that immigration has always been a part of the fabric of the state. It's part of the identity of many of us who live here, myself included. But there's always been a cost to that identity, to that immigration, whether it's economic or political or financial. But it feels like more than in recent history, the human side, the human cost of this debate has really been front and center. And it seems hard to ignore that human cost in a state where several millions of residents are immigrants themselves, a state in which at least 1.6 million undocumented immigrants call home, and a state where another few million have at least one parent who is an immigrant. And so I wanted to just sort of go down the line in opening this and ask, you know, what is the biggest misconception you hear about immigrants, and what's your response to that misconception? We'll start with Jay.
Well, I don't know if it's a misconception, but you know, one thing that just stands out to me over and over is my family has been in the farming and agricultural business for a lot of years in Texas. And we worked starting with the Pasero program all the way up through, I guess, having some undocumented prior to IRCA, and then with laborers that had some sort of citizenship or some sort of work authorization after IRCA until now. And to be frank, these are the hardest working individuals you'll run across. They are. I did a piece for NBC Nightly News back in the mid-2000s where I basically got on air and begged people, come work. We need people to come work. And I think I had one out of the whole country, and he worked for a couple days in the heat. And I mean, most of our labor's done in May and in June, and he worked out in the heat. And 2 or 3 days, he said, and I'm the same way. I look at that and think, man, thank God I have these people, but I can't believe how they do it. So I don't know if it's a misconception, but they are very hard workers, and they're here to earn a living. I mean, because of their situation, their economic situation, their living conditions of where they come from, they've got to make a living. They don't have an option. So they're very focused on why they come here, and they're very focused on trying to provide for their family. So they're just very, very hardworking people.
Andrea, you've been pulled into this debate even if you didn't want to. What's the biggest misconception you see?
So definitely, one of the few things that I do want to say is that I am the child of the broken immigration system here in the United States. What I mean by that is my grandparents are actually U.S. citizens. The wait line for a green card so that my mom could get a green card was 23 years when we got here. She's currently going through that process, but based on that process, she can't do anything for me, and neither can my grandparents. So there's this huge misconception about Daca students that we could have done something about our situation, that we could have technically a pathway to citizenship, but we do not. And there's also a huge misconception of the kind of aid that we receive. We do not receive aid. I am not entitled to federal financial aid. I pay everything out of pocket. I've had to pay, technically, in some cases, even an extra fee to receive in-state tuition. And based on that, I've had to work 2 to 3 jobs every single summer, or have had to work 2 to 3 jobs every single semester to come by and be able to pay for my tuition. So I've had to work twice as hard as some of my peers to receive technically half of the things that they are made available to them. And I think it is very true in what you're saying. A lot of immigrants are very, very hardworking. But I'm here to create opportunities for other people. I'm not here to take them away. And I think that is a huge misconception happening right now in the American fabric.
Dr. May, you work with a lot of immigrant students. What's the biggest misconception you see?
I hear a couple that kind of play out all the time, and we do. We actually don't know the total number of immigrants we work with. What we know are the students that may come in on student visas. We know the individuals that qualify under Noriega, as we call it, which allows in-state tuition for individuals who aren't residents of the country when they meet certain criteria for that. So we are able to provide that. Of that population, we every year serve between 2,000 and 3,800. Just looking over the last several years, we estimate as many as 15,000 immigrants could be enrolled in our college at any time. So it's a huge part of us. But because we're in a community where 40% of the population was not born in this country, where 22% weren't born in this country, 40% English is not the primary language spoken at home. So as a college, we serve about 165,000 students every year. It stands to reason that we would see a lot of immigrants enrolling. I think the other that I hear this externally, well, I don't know why you're educating them, they can't work. Well, that's false when that happens. We work with police departments, we work with schools because of the need for bilingual teachers particularly. That's a very strong pathway that we put in place, as well as with law enforcement and others that need those skills. I think the second is that they don't have the background to succeed. Frankly, they're among our best students. We graduate a disproportionate number of individuals that, particularly Daca, we graduate about 300 a year compared to the overall enrollment of our institution and the success. So they're coming in with determination, drive, commitment, grit, those qualities that we all want to see them succeed, and they move on into have great jobs within our community.
Elizabeth, de las impresiones falsas que usted escucha sobre los inmigrantes, ¿cuál es la que más le llama la atención y cuál sería su respuesta a esa impresión falsa? I asked her the same question of the misconceptions she hears about immigrants. What is the biggest one and what's her response to that?
Cuando muchas veces hablan de que nosotros llegamos de un país a otro como para robar.
Many times they talk about us coming from one country to another to steal.
Cosa que a veces no es verdad.
Something that is
Sobre
most times
todo
not true.
Cuando migramos con toda nuestra familia.
Especially when we're migrating with our whole families.
Y usted se vino con su familia. She came here with a big part of her family.
Con mis hijos, incluso están afuera.
Con los niños, with her children that are even here today.
I want to start with Daca when we talk about sort of more specific questions about this human cost. We know undocumented immigrants are not new to the state, but it almost feels like their connections to their communities have been really highlighted this year through the Daca debate. Andrea, I'm curious, now that the Trump administration has announced that it plans to end Daca, it's asked Congress to act on some sort of alternative. So far, folks in Washington seem to be at an impasse. In what position has this left you?
I mean, in one way or another, I've been preparing for this for months. It's not a new idea for me. I knew that this could potentially be a very clear future for me, in where I would be left with nothing. Because what I have right now has been thanks to Daca. When I was in high school, I had a college counselor who told me that I would never go to a university. The thought of me being here, standing, talking to you guys was not actually a reality to me. I was given the opportunity to apply for the Daca program the second that it was made available to me, which was back in 2012 when I was a junior in high school. And that opened so many doors for me. And now I'm starting to see those doors start to close. And in many ways, I've been very grateful to be working with my community. I'm serving as a fellow for a local organization, and I've been working with a lot of civic involved people here, mainly youth. And one of the things that really makes me sad is that my ability to work with these people might be very limited in the future if nothing is done with Daca. And I will go ahead and say this 100 times over. I feel like it is a privilege to be here. I do believe that me being here is an absolute privilege. But in one way or another, it was not something that I was imagining that would ever happen to me. I didn't ask to come to a country that would technically make fun of my accent in one way or another. I was exposed to things that I never imagined that I would at a really young age. And there's a lot of fears happening in my community, and I think everything is coming to realization with what's happening with the current administration.
Dr. May, you've referred to educating immigrants, particularly undocumented students, as a human capital issue. Walk us through that and walk us through how your organization is sort of helping students as they stand in this sort of limbo.
Sure, and let me explain maybe even the human capital piece. It's probably been touched on some, but when we know, and we work very closely with organizations like the Federal Reserve Bank and others to get a real understanding of what's happening in the workforce, what's happening in the economy. And what we know is that as a country, we're gross domestic product, GDP, is stagnant at 2%. And I can tell you, no matter how you chart it, it can't possibly grow each year as we see year-over-year growth. Half of that is due to immigrants coming in. Fully half of that, the annual growth that we're seeing in the economy, meaning because there's only two ways we can grow the GDP. That's either you increase the size of the workforce or you increase the productivity of the workforce. That's it. There's nothing else that makes that happen. So when we look at it from a human capital side, we really are looking at it, how do we grow an economy? We have a fast-growing economy in the North Texas area, one of the fastest in the country, growing in the country, and how do we prepare people for the jobs that are needed in that economy? So if we can't get people into those jobs and they're left behind, then frankly they're left to live a life of poverty. We know what happens in those situations. Then there are other social issues, there are community issues, the quality of life goes down. It has a dramatic impact on the places where I want to live, where I want my children to live and grandchildren to live. So when we talk about human capital, what we're really talking about is, in fact, what's best, not only for the individual, but what's best for the overall economy and the communities in which we all live and where we all work.
You know, when we talk about immigration in this state, oftentimes you hear, oh, it's this immigration debate, but there are so many different sides to it. Andrea is in a very different position than Elizabeth might be and they both, when they reached this country, started in very different places in a lot of ways. Elizabeth, you were detained with your family for more than 40 days. I believe your 5-year-old granddaughter had a birthday while detained, aware that she was detained. Can you walk us through that experience and the sort of toll it took on you and your family? ¿Cómo fue la experiencia para usted estando detenida y teniendo su familia ahí?
Creo que fue una experiencia bastante mala.
I believe that it was an experience, a pretty bad experience.
Porque mi nieta cumplió 5 años estando en la detención.
My granddaughter did turn 5 years old while detained.
Y ella dice, ma, ese no es un lugar para un niño.
And she says, Mom, that's no place for a child.
Ni para una familia.
Nor for a whole family.
Nadie se merece estar en la detención, ma.
Nobody deserves to be in detention, Mom.
Y fue algo, nos tocó vivirlo a los 5 y ella dice ahora,
that happened to all 5 of us together.
Ma, qué bueno es Dios con nosotros porque pudimos salir de la detención y ahora tenemos una vida digna.
She says, thank God that we were allowed to leave detention and now we have a dignified life.
You know, I want to talk about the idea of dignity, particularly in the sort of environment that immigrants are living today. We've heard a lot about fears in the community. You know, we've talked about the debate on the federal level, the future of Daca, building of a wall, cracking down on illegal immigration. State lawmakers added a different component to that debate and that fear this year when the legislature passed SB 4, which among several other things allows for law enforcement to ask those that they're detaining even during a traffic stop for their immigration status. You know, as a result of all this, we've heard about that strong current of fear running through immigrant communities, both in the country legally and those who entered illegally and are living here undocumented. I wanted to ask Jay, you know, your livelihood in many ways depends on migrant work, and I've read old news stories in which you talked about the toll the debate was already taking on migrants, where they were fearful of moving and going to farms to work, and the date on this story was 10 years ago. You know, what is it like today?
I don't know if we've changed a whole lot in 10 years. Somebody's asked me in here earlier, we look around and we see faces that have been a part of this debate forever, and it's unchanged. I mean, we're doing the same thing today as we were doing 10 years ago, as 15 years ago, and from the business aspect, you get a sense of apathy, and you just finally, maybe I should just give up, do something else, not worry about this. So I can only imagine on the other side, the human aspect of it, how they feel. But in Uvalde, which we're 70 miles west of here, we're just outside of the Border Patrol checkpoint zone. And we're also a Border Patrol hub. Community. We serve 2 or 3 sectors that are people, they congregate there and they live there, and the Carrizo sector, Del Rio sector, there's 2 or 3 sectors that are served in there. And so you can't drive a block without seeing a Border Patrol car in our area. And so, yeah, this has always been a big problem for us, because although as an employer, you know, we're doing everything legally we're supposed to do, we're checking I-9s, we're trying to make sure we have as legal of a workforce as we can. Legally, we can. But, you know, the numbers in agriculture, as many as 70 to 80% are either undocumented or falsely documented. So when they look around and they see that problem there locally, yeah, it puts a huge strain on us as employers, because we saw, really when we saw enforcement ramp up in the mid-2000s, we had a labor force that just disappeared, basically disappeared. And that's why I really got into this debate, is we had 2 or 3 crop losses where we lost $250,000. It just rotted in the field. And I was a lot younger, and three kids younger at that time. You know, I saw the hard work that my family and my father had put into them, and that's when I got into the debate, really. And so people just, they come in through our area and they get out. If they're coming here falsely documented, we're not seeing them in agriculture where I'm at. Sometimes you see them inside the checkpoint zone, and they have some problems, more so up the country, where you see ICE raids, you see them on the news about them raiding farms and stuff. You don't see that in Uvalde, because I think we have a situation there where we're highly enforced.
Elizabeth, I wanted to ask you, I'm going to ask her in Spanish and then I'll switch back to English. Usted mencionó que vive con un poco más de dignidad, pero ¿qué tipo de miedos carga usted cuando anda por su día normal? I asked her, she said she lives with more dignity today than she did when she was detained and when she first got here, but what are sort of the fears that she lives with as she goes through her everyday life?
Cuando las personas venimos, como vine yo a este país,
when people come to this country, how I did,
que venimos por persecución criminal,
we arrived because of criminal persecution, as in like criminals persecuting these families.
es bien difícil salir a la calle,
It's very
o que
difficult
te
to go
tomen fotos
outside,
como ahorita me lo están haciendo,
to have cameras pointed at you
porque sé
like
que
they
me
are right
buscan,
now.
no
Because I
solo a mí,
know
también a mi
that
familia.
I'm being looked for, and not just me, but my family.
Entonces, hay mucho miedo de que digan de que tenemos que regresar para atrás,
It
cuando
is very
sabemos
scary
que
to think that we will be sent back,
si ahora llegamos a nuestro país, mañana estamos muertos.
because we know that if we're sent back to our countries
Es bastante el miedo.
today, tomorrow we will be dead. And that is a
Bastante.
lot of fear, very much so.
Andrea, how do you experience this on a day-to-day basis?
So actually, me standing here, like I said, was a taboo subject in my house. My mom told me when I was 12, she told me, my application has been approved, but I can't do anything for you. You can't tell anyone about what's going on in our household. So I was forced to live in a situation in where I had to pretend that I was just like my peers, when I knew that I wasn't. I lied twice that I failed my driver's exam because I said, oh yeah, I failed it. But I knew that I couldn't get it. So it was like that peer, having to look like my peers, but knowing that I wasn't like my peers, and then that playing an emotional toll on me every single day and being told no in every single way. When Daca appeared, when Daca was approved, when I became part of Daca, a lot of these fears were taken away. And now that Daca is getting removed, is getting rescinded, my family is afraid that me standing here talking to all of you guys would create some sort of like outcry against me. I have already gotten the negative attention. I've done a few media coverage stories in where I look at the comments on those comments boards, and almost all of them are 100% awful. Not understanding my situation, seeing me as a criminal rather than as a person. And like I said, this is not a situation that I thought I would be in. At the age of 8, I didn't think, oh, I'm going to have to fight for my ability of staying where I believe I belong for however many years. That was never something that I imagined. But yet here I am. And it does play a fear, because you never know who's going to be standing behind the screen looking at you with eyes that are unfavorable.
Dr. May, how does this fear play out on your campuses?
Several different ways. With the announcement of rescinding DACA, we immediately heard an outcry, not only from our students, but from our faculty and staff as well, and wondering in terms of our role, what we could do to help. So we immediately put together a number of forums. I can't pretend to understand some of the anxiety and fear that's happening there, but we wanted to be clear that we were 100% committed to supporting our students, both now and into the future. So we did 30, 40 forums where we invited students. Some were afraid to come to be a part of it. We also saw something else that happened that was of enough concern that I kind of scrapped a talk that I was giving to roughly 3,000 of our 7,000 employees, where we saw suddenly, because of the rescinding of DACA, we saw some evidence that perhaps bigotry then was okay. We saw people grouped together and treated differently just because of the color of their skin or their perceived background. And so we saw signs of hate. We saw some other demonstrations of certainly behavior that is counter to the environment that we try to provide as a college or a university here would want to do. So yes, the impact, and what we really did is deploy resources. We engaged with our community, bringing people together at no charge to assist with legal aid, to assist with others, so that we could really provide the type of guidance which, we're really not qualified to do that. We don't have that type of background as an organization. We understand, the process of helping people come in from another country or elsewhere to take advantage of an education, but we really aren't prepared that well for what to do when the law changes, and suddenly, as an institution of the state, on one hand we abide by law, on the other hand we've got that human element. So it makes it very, very difficult for institutions like ours. And I would just say there's another one probably no one thinks about, in that we run a police department of 150 law officers that are there. So as and many of our large districts are similar in terms of that size. So this is a full-fledged police department. So as we look at what's that role and how do we engage in that, when we're really there to help all individuals at our colleges feel safe, there's now an element where many of them see our police officers and they're fearful of them at this point.
I want to talk about possible solutions. We hear a lot from our state leaders, this needs to be fixed up at the federal level, where you hear we can't talk about reform before we talk about enforcement and really stemming illegal immigration. I wanted to start with you, Jay, just because you've ran for office as a Republican before. You've talked about a guest worker program. At one point, I believe you opposed a path to citizenship. Given your experience with the intersection of both the economic and human cost of immigration, what's the solution for you?
Well, you know, the political reality of it is there's so many factions within the immigration debate. It's become really tough to solve individual pieces of it. You know, I spent a lot of time in D.C. working on an agricultural guest worker program. You know, we sat and had a long conversation with, it was Lamar Smith's office back in, I guess it would be 2008, 2010, when he first introduced his E-Verify legislation. And a lot of those measures were great and could help, but without solving other things at the same time, and solving, my issue was a guest worker force. They were counterintuitive to the overall goal of it. And people that have worked very hard on the Daca legislation have heard the same thing that I have. Hey, we're all about solving some of the agricultural problems. It's one of the few places that you see a lot of bipartisan support. But if we solve yours, y'all all go away, and y'all are helpful to trying to solve the overall plan of immigration reform. And so there are a lot of people out there, a lot of elected leaders out there that don't want to see individual pieces solved, because then we're not going to address the issue as a whole. So you know, it becomes a problem for the individual pieces. I mean, it's harder. There's less political will to solve some of the individual pieces of legislation. I mean, there's been a great piece of legislation this year about a guest worker program in D.C. It has moved further than we've seen movement in the past, but there's going to be a lot of people that put some brakes on it when they realize that we may lose those people at the table if we solve their specific issue.
You know, one of the panelists on the panel before this talked about how advocates a lot of the time want citizenship, but if you talk to some of the actual immigrants, they'd be okay with legal status. I'm curious, Andrea and Elizabeth, is there a preference for you, or are you just looking for whatever allows you to stay in a secure way?
I mean, personally, based on my aspirations, if I wanted to eventually do what I want to do, I would have to become a citizen. That is no question for me. Do I believe that there should be a pathway to citizenship for DACA students? I definitely do. And I do believe that there are certain programs like the TPS that definitely ended in, I mean, right now we're seeing a lot of people being hurt by this rescinded of the TPS. There's people that have open businesses here, DACA students included, that are going to lose everything if it's taken away. And one way or another, whether it is a pathway to citizenship that is a pathway to citizenship for the next 15 years, which I saw a bill that is offering that, or a pathway to citizenship in the next 10 years, I need a pathway to citizenship to complete my dreams. Those are my dreams. But I understand that some people in the community are willing to technically downplay their needs and say, I'll get whatever I can at this point, because that's what the fear is. It's, well, they're going to play against me in one way or another, so let me go ahead and get whatever I can at this point. But is that really fair to ask that of people, to just go ahead and give up all their aspirations just to get some sort of small relief in their situation? I don't know if that's something that I truly believe in.
And that's a perfect example of immigration reform as a whole, right there. That's how it is. There's a lot of people that are saying, okay, there are some fears out there. I'll take something a lot less. You heard a gentleman here on the panel before speaking about that you know, their ultimate goal was a pathway to citizenship, but if the political breeze didn't provide that, you know, they take something a little less. And you hear a lot of that. You hear that in the agricultural community. And when it comes, if we're going to, a lot of people want to, I don't want to say a lot of people want to hold out for the pie in the sky, but you know, there's a lot of people that take the view, and elected leaders and students and religious leaders and you know, business leaders that hold out the view that, hey, we've got to solve this all at once. It's a three-legged stool. It's enforcement, it's dealing with the undocumented communities here, and then it's providing a future path for workers to come here and a future path for becoming a citizen of this country.
Dr. May, you're nodding your head, and I want to come back to you. I just wanted to ask Elizabeth first the same question I asked Andrea, whether she would prefer legal status over citizenship, if that is what could come first. Elizabeth, ¿a usted le gustaría primero, tiene alguna preferencia de obtener su estatus legal o su ciudadanía, o realmente no le importa en estas alturas?
Como miro las cosas de que ahora supuestamente salió una nueva ley donde dice que ya no están dando asilo.
The way I saw things, I'm seeing lots of things on the news about like judges not giving asylum, laws not allowing for asylum to be granted.
Ya creo que lo que me den no importa.
I believe now that whatever they give me, it doesn't matter. Si me deja, ¿puedo comentar un poco del asilo? If I can comment a little bit on this.
Sure.
Suyapa and her whole family, they're all asylum seekers. And so even here in San Antonio, we have judges whose asylum granting rates are about 75% denials. The judges in Tennessee, in a lot of places, have actually been sued by the federal government for not granting asylum. And it's a process that begins with detention, right? So at this point, what she's saying, if we can have a stay in the country, that should be fine, because one, she doesn't want her and her community of asylum seekers, they don't want to go back to detention and being jailed for asking for asylum, and also you know, to have a final say. A lot of asylum seekers are strung along for many years. They are not told the information of where they're supposed to go to court, where they're supposed to show up, and how to keep their process going.
Dr. May, I wanted to ask you, I saw you nodding when Jay was speaking, but I also wanted to ask you, you're sort of in a tricky position because you're a public official in some ways, and you're sort of left to navigate tricky political waters regularly. What do you see as your role in helping toward a solution, or do you not see that as a role?
Well, you know, there are a couple of things we try to do. I mean, one of the things that we've seen, frankly, is a shift in attitude. You know, we have a partnership with the Dallas Independent School District, for example, where we work. We have helped 68 Daca students move into full-time jobs teaching as bilingual faculty in those schools, and that was a great pathway until suddenly it's questioned. Until suddenly that's up in the air, as we now, the superintendent has no idea if reform doesn't occur in some form, what's going to happen to these individuals and how that will play out, where they'll be left. So what I've seen is a real jump in terms of people wanting that citizenship route, that pathway to that, because of the circumstances that are now occurring. And you're right, we are. On one hand, we're obligated to enforce the law within our responsibility that's out there. And like I said, for some institutions, some of the issues aren't as big a problem as they are for us. But because we choose to operate and have for example, a police department, now they fall under some of the same requirements as do any other law enforcement agency that's out there. So on one hand, we're supporting students. We're carrying. I'll go a step further. We've set aside dollars, have for years, in case Noriega went away, that we could fully scholarship the difference. We scholarship most of our DACA students today, as we actually do most of our students coming that come to us. So the price would go up dramatically at that point. We're prepared to do that because it's the right thing to do, but at the same time, some would argue that we're working against state law when we take that position.
Is it okay if I make a quick
absolutely.
statement? I do think that anything that is passed that is not permanent will just keep causing problems, because we are seeing it now. DACA was not a permanent solution. TPS was not a permanent solution. So if we do not establish something that is permanent, we will be facing the possibility that future administrations are going to resign programs. And that is just the way that things are. So if we do not establish something that is permanent, either if it is a permanent pathway to citizenship or something that addresses the problem, because this is kind of like a tree. There's roots underneath, and those are the ones that are attributing to the problem above. If we do not address what's happening below, then nothing is going to get done above. And whether this is some sort of problem that has to be addressed now or in the future, it has to be addressed as a permanent solution.
We're nearing our Q&A portion, so just a heads up to those who may have any questions. But I wanted to ask, I remember during some of the rallies and protests during this legislative session and into the summer, my colleague Juliana Aguilar and I used to talk and question how many of the folks out there were immigrants, and particularly undocumented immigrants, knowing that some of these protests happened in the middle of the day when folks might actually be working to make ends meet and support their families, and there was fear to come out at this sort of event because they didn't want to be around law enforcement, which tends to patrol some of these events for the protesters' safety. And so I wanted to ask, the sort of advocacy network surrounding immigrants and those asking for immigration reform, in a lot of ways ends up requiring a lot of the immigrants themselves to become voices for their communities. I think both Andrea and Elizabeth have mentioned that while they're up here. Do you, and this is a question specifically for them, but I'm also curious about your opinions, do you feel a pressure to speak out and become that voice for your community in case others don't?
So personally, I'm very privileged to say that my mother has some sort of pathway to citizenship. My mother is going through the process. Whether it is a 23-year process or not, she has a process. So I'm coming out speaking knowing that my mother has some sort of safety net. I do not. And I realized that if I did not speak for myself, no one else was going to speak for me. And I knew that if I was going to, let's say that a meteor struck me right now and I was to die right now, I would be happy knowing that I died standing on my feet, fighting for what I believe in, fighting for my patrimony, fighting for the patrimony of my community, than knowing that I died on my knees just moping around on the situation. Definitely, I do believe that there is a pressure for me to come out and speak. And I became the leader of a student organization here on campus that is mainly undocumented and Daca based. And I am seeing that communities scared beyond belief. And me knowing that I am in a more privileged position than them, I know that I have to come out and speak up. This is not the time for me to shut down. It really isn't. Because the students like me that are willing to come out are the ones that are making the difference right now. They're the ones that are going to the Capitol. They're the ones that are doing protests on the Senate floor. They're the ones that are actually they're organizing the community in a way to participate by using their voices. And whether I work on it now or for the next 10 years, I will continue to speak up if that is something that I need to do.
I'm going to ask a similar question of Elizabeth, who earlier this year testified at the Capitol against a bill that would have licensed detention centers as child care facilities. She's also taken an advocate role despite some of the fear that she lives with. So I'm going to switch into Spanish. Elizabeth, usted este año estuvo en el Capitolio hablando con legisladores sobre su oposición a una ley que hubiera dado licencia a alguno de estos centros de detención como facilidades para cuidar a los niños. ¿Siente usted esa presión de ser activista, de hablar por su comunidad, aun con el miedo con el que vive?
Sí.
¿Qué es lo que lo lleva a hacer eso?
Una cárcel no es un hogar para niños.
A jail is no place for children.
No es escuela ni guardería.
It is not a school. It is not a child care facility.
Aunque tenga muchas cosas bonitas, una cárcel siempre va a ser una
In spite of
cárcel.
having all the pretty things, a jail will always be a jail.
I'm going to ask her a follow-up about what led her to want to speak so publicly about it. ¿Y qué fue lo que la hizo hablar tan públicamente sobre eso?
Todo lo que vivimos con mis hijos.
Everything that we live together with my
Mi
children.
hijo ahora tiene 11 años. Él se enfermó estando preso.
My son is now 11 years old. He was sick while he was
Mi hija
incarcerated.
mayor también se enfermó estando presa.
My oldest daughter also was sick while incarcerated.
y uno no podía hacer nada porque no tienes cómo ayudarlos.
And there's nothing you can do because there's no way to help them.
Entonces, una cárcel no es un lugar para familias.
So jail is no place for families.
I wanted to ask Dr. May and Jay, what do you see your role as folks who work with big populations of immigrants? Do you speak out? Do you advise? Do you inform? What's your role?
Well, most people would consider me kind of out there on this issue. I have been outspoken, not certainly internally to our organization. We have a lot of people. Not everyone agrees. That's putting it mildly. And as we talk about the issue, but when we look at the role of education, it really is always about the greater good. Certainly, there's individual benefit, and we're proud of that individual attainment, that an individual has the opportunity to succeed, and that's really what everybody wants. I mean, you ask them what they want; they just want the opportunity, and they want frankly a fair shake. Those are really the things people are looking for to get there. So to speak out in support of that seems to me to be the right thing that we should be doing as institutions that serve our entire community, not just part of a community.
Jay, do you see a role to help humanize this issue within the political debate?
Yeah, and I've sat on hundreds of panels on the immigration debate, but I've sat on a few of these. Mostly my role is economic, and we're talking about legislation and stuff like that. And every time I sit on one of these, I'm humbled because I've got real dollars that I can equate to this problem that we've caused in this country. But my problems aren't anywhere near as your problems. And, I realize that when I'm up here. And, it really comes down to wherever you are on this debate. And I grew up in Uvalde, west of here, and I probably, as a kid growing up, my skin probably was more brown than white because I lived in a farmhouse where we had immigrant workers there half the time. And at that time, as kids, we went into Mexico a lot. My grandparents did their medical drug shopping in Mexico. We traveled back and forth quite a bit. And there's not a person in this room, if you were born on that side of the border, regardless of where you are in the debate in this country right now, but if you were born on that side of the border and you were making $4 a day and your family was in harm's way because of cartel or whatever it was, that you wouldn't swim that river and come over here to support your family. There's nobody. And then there's really none of our elected leaders that if they were faced with that question, wouldn't do the same thing. And so, yeah, I feel a role of speaking up because I rely on a immigrant workforce, an Hispanic workforce to support my family and my business. So, yeah, that's one reason I got in this debate. And like you said, I think anybody that tries to be productive in this debate is stepping out because, and it's a hard place to be. The only people that really like talking about immigration reform are the people that are earning political capital one way or another so they can go home and get their votes, to be honest with you. Everybody else, this is a very uncomfortable situation to talk about because there are going to be ramifications, whether it's business ramifications. I mean, I had people on, we were talking, one of you mentioned about getting on a chat forum after doing some sort of forum or something and all the bad comments that are out there. I mean, I remember getting on there and saying, oh, I'm not going to ever buy this vegetable again because everybody that grows this vegetable, they're terrible people because he's talking about this. So this is a hard subject to talk about. But if you're going to rely on it somehow, you've got to. She's got to. Who else is going to speak up for her? She doesn't. So yes, my short answer is yes. I feel like we need to.
We're going to go ahead and open it up for questions from the audience, if anyone. We've got mics on either side. We'll start on this side and then we'll come back.
Two nuns. Hi, I'm Sister J.T. Dwyer, a daughter of Charity that lives here in San Antonio and part of the Interfaith Welcome Coalition here. My question is for Andrea. We have over 5 universities in San Antonio. We have no United We Dream chapter. Why?
So actually, I can go ahead and stand to say that we do have people that work with United We Dream that work with our universities. We have a person that is, for example, here at the downtown campus that was a co-founder for United We Dream. So while we do not have a San Antonio chapter, we do have people working with us. And I can go ahead and attest that, for example, the immigrant youth organization that I'm part of, the one that I'm leading, we have been leading in talks with trying to connect universities across San Antonio to create a better patrimony for DACA students and undocumented students alike. I was very thankful to President Igmi that he allowed me to become involved in talks on opening an immigration center here at the UTSA campus, whether it was downtown or at the main campus. And we are seeing process on that the university wants to help its students. What I do agree on is that we do need a United We Dream chapter here. And I do think that those talks can definitely start becoming more serious and become to flourish. But yes, I agree with you. I have no idea why we do not have an actual established chapter here when we need it.
I think we need it very much because we have many, many, many nonprofits in this greater San Antonio area working with immigrants and refugees. And we need to be together and know what each other's doing. But we can't relate to this multiplicity of all these different small DACA organizations. We need a single organization to relate to so that when we're trying to move something forward, whether it's an action, a piece of legislation, or whatever, we can get all the groups on board. And we don't have a single entity here that is the youth particle, the youth that are so much affected by this issue.
Thank you, ma'am. Next question.
Actually, I have 2 questions for 2 people. Is that fair?
Sure.
Okay. Number 1 for Elizabeth. Muchas gracias por su presencia aquí y por su familia aquí con nosotros, okay, y sus regalos para nosotros en este país. Now I'm going to switch to English because my Spanish is very iffy, okay? I know that the detention center is located in Karnes County, which is the center of fracking in the Eagle Ford Shale. It's the most highly active. It has the most number of wells. It is the most polluted air, and it has an issue with uranium in the water, which has gone on for many years, but which is complicated by the fracking activity there. So my question is, did you ever see or witness any of the women and children in the center with certain health problems that were showing up? Did you witness strange tastes in the water or difficulty breathing, anything like nosebleeds?
The water, for sure.
El agua es fatal.
The water is fatal.
Los 45 días que estuve ahí,
The 45
iba
days that I was
medía
there,
y llevaba una botellita y la llenaba en el garrafón.
I would take my water bottle and fill it with the water fountain, the garrafón.
Filtered water?
The filtered water, yes.
De otra clase de agua.
Yeah. If I can add, a scientist actually came by Karnes and tested the water, and they found it not able to, for human consumption. It was
Yes,
too
and the
polluted.
city of Kennedy had to put out notices to their people to drink bottled water for a while. That was about a year ago.
Pero en Karnes eso no dan.
So I would like to invite any lawyers in the room.
Oh, I think she wanted to say something.
Oh, she has more to say, good.
Cuando yo llevaba a mis hijos, siempre decía que no tenían tiempo los doctores.
Doctors, when I brought my kids, they would say that they don't have enough time to check them.
Those are the doctors in Karnes County?
Yes, the doctors in Karnes County Detention Center.
Y mi hijo grande, él tenía 10 años cuando estábamos ahí.
My oldest son, he was 11 when we were detained, and
Sus ojos se pusieron muy amarillos
his eyes became
y
very
no
yellow.
comía y yo le decía, papi, vamos al doctor.
He lost his
Y no me lo
appetite.
atendían y yo le dije un día, bueno, si
The
no me lo
doctors would not see
atienden,
him.
entonces díganme qué tengo que hacer
And so she said,
porque yo
well,
no le puedo ayudar
we're not
así.
gonna look
Aquí
after-
no puedo.
if you're not going to look for him, if
Y-
you're not going to treat him, if you're not going to treat him, then you're going to need to tell me what to do because I can't look after him in this jail.
Siempre decían que él estaba normal, que su color de ojos era normal.
The doctors would say that he was normal, that his eyes were normal.
Y mi hijo no quería ni la comida, no quería estar ahí, no quería nada.
My son
Y decía,
did not want any
"Ma,
food.
si no salimos de aquí, no sé qué va a pasar.
He
Decía.
didn't want to eat. He said, whatever, if we don't get out of here, I don't know what's going to happen to me.
I will.
We'll do, we'll get to your second question so that we have enough time to
Right,
jump
good,
back over,
good,
please.
Thank you. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Delilah Reynoso. I'm from Tyler, Texas, about 6 hours away from here. So I just want to say thank you to you dreamers because now you guys have re-inspired me. I'm not a DACA recipient, but I do advocate for the DACA in Tyler, Texas, because I come from an area where it's very conservative, and dreamers don't like to speak up on this issue, but thank you for re-inspiring me because now I can take that back to even fight harder for the dreamers in East Texas. So thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. We'll come back here and we'll make this our last question. We're standing between you and lunch, so we'll wrap this up shortly.
Yes, I'm hungry, ready to eat too, so I'll be short. Now, I wanted to ask our agriculture representative, or first I want to thank you for your hard work in putting food on our tables, and your laborers also, because I know that is hard work. They also pave our roads and so forth, and people drive by and never see that. I wanted to ask you, and I understand that you've been active in committees and commissions and so forth to advocate for changes in immigration laws from your viewpoint. My question is, I see that as being in a position to appeal to those in power. Have you ever tried gathering people like yourself, agricultural and business people who need this labor, to come together, to get lawyers to help you write the law, and then take it to the legislature and say, this is a law we want you to pass, and if you don't pass it, all the farmers are going to see that we have other representatives in your chairs next year.
And yeah, those situations have happened. We actually, we tried to pass a daily commuter program. One is working at the state level. The immigration issue is a federal issue, so it's kind of hard to work independently. But as Texas, we took to our Texas federal elected officials a daily commuter program that allowed people to come back over the border daily or weekly, and back into Mexico, come back and work. There's actually a program. It's called the Longshoreman Program that works very well. And basically it's for people that work on ships from other countries. So they have biometric cards. They come in, they check in. When it's time for the ships to leave, they check out. We have technology to handle a lot of situations now, and I don't understand why we don't. Anyway, we took that program up there, and basically we ran into all our leaders that said, no, we understand your problem, but this is a federal issue, and as a state, we'd have to do it for the border as a whole. And that's great, do it for everybody. We're not trying to just solve our problem and leave everybody else out there. But this goes back to a lot of your elected officials, they don't want to see agriculture taken off the table, because we are probably outside of the immigrant community. We have been the loudest asking for support. Some of our images they play the best on TV. They garner the most attention because you see fruits and vegetables rotting out in the field, and you talk about grocery store and people going to buy that produce, and so people relate to that. And the elected officials that really want to solve this issue don't want to just solve it for agriculture, and that's been a problem. There's kind of a saying that's gone around D.C. for years and years and years is, we'll keep playing political football with this and kicking it back and forth and not really going to solve this issue until it finally becomes a problem where there's nobody to wait on our tables and staff the hotels in DC, then they'll solve it the next day, because that's the real problem up there. So unfortunately, I wish there was just an agricultural solution out there, or I wish we could solve agriculture, but I don't think it's going to happen.
Well, folks, we're out of time, but I'm sorry. Thank you so much for being here. Let's give our panelists a big round of applause. Don't forget, there's lunch waiting for you out there and a documentary screening that follows lunch. Thanks so much.